Right, so today is the anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe as it translates to, the expulsion of more than 750,000 Palestinians immediately after the State of Israel came into existence, beginning exactly as it has carried on ever since. But instead of being a moment of reflection, being one of history's never again moments, an institution supposedly there to acknowledge history and bring it to life instead became the venue for a party, for a celebration, because for some the Nakba is not what they remember, but instead they celebrate the birth of that nation that has now been enacting genocide for 19 months, has held Gaza under a legal blockade for the last 18 years, has illegally occupied the Palestinian territories for the last 58 years, and of course it is 77 years since the Nakba. But instead it's candle blowing out time. Happy 77th birthday to Israel. Despite trying to keep the event secret, protesters descended upon it, led by energy embargo for Palestine, the British Museum's ties to Israel themselves coming to light, but so did the UK government's actions in Israel, confirmed by a defence minister in attendance, proving beyond doubt what many of us have been saying for months, so she might not be thanked for what might well have been a rather large gaffe. Right, so while for many this is a time of solemn remembrance as Israel continues its genocide of Gaza, others were celebrating behind closed doors last night, lauding the birth of the entity carrying out said genocide whilst they were partying. The British Museum, like most British museums sadly, filled with items, some at least that can be regarded as ill-gotten artefacts steeped in colonial legacy, hosted a celebration marking the 77th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel. For Palestinians and millions globally, however, this date does not symbolise liberation or independence. It marks the Nakba, the catastrophe, when over 750,000 Palestinians were violently uprooted from their homes by Israeli forces in 1948. That the museum would not only host this event but attempt to do so in secret, frankly speaks volumes. That they might be celebrating, but they don't want you to know about it. The guest list that gathered within the museum's halls reads like a rogues gallery of Britain's reactionary pro-Israel elite. Labour Defence Minister Maria Eagle delivered the keynote speech. Also in attendance was Tory leader, for now at least, still clinging on, Kemi Badenoch, and both Nigel Farage and Richard Tice of Reform UK were there too, just to remind people that Reform UK are absolutely not any different, especially when it comes to Israel. It was wall-to-wall right-wing authoritarianism on show. The entertainment, if you can call it that, was provided by Jimmy Carr, who I find one of the most irritating and unfunny so-called comedians going, and overseeing the whole affair was Zippy Hotovelli, Israel's rancid ambassador to the UK, whose hardline Zionist views and open disdain for Palestinian rights I have covered on many a video on this channel now. She shouldn't have been comparing. She should have been on a plane back to Tel Aviv years ago, expelled from these islands, but it's part of the speech that Maria Eagle gave that has raised eyebrows, so get a load of this.
As a long-standing friend and partner, it's been hard over the last couple of years to see Israel going through some of the most difficult times in its history. The appalling, unconscionable attacks on the 7th of October are still seared into our minds. The UK stood with Israel, with the RAF conducting surveillance flights over the eastern Mediterranean in support of hostage rescue efforts. We stood with Israel when Iran launched its reckless, coordinated missile and drone attacks, with RAF aircraft intercepting a number of them. And we continue to stand with Israel today, supporting her right to security and the right of all Israelis to live free from fear and violence. On Israel's birthday, my thoughts also remain with all the hostages held still in Gaza. There's absolutely no justification for their continued detention, and we call for their unconditional release. And we want to see the humanitarian situation improve. What we hope for and are working for is a deal that brings a stop to the fighting, enables the release of all hostages, gets the aid flowing, and establishes a political horizon with credible and irreversible path to peace.
Apart from the level of background noise showing how few people were evidently paying the blindest bit of attention to the droning voice of Eagle, there's no mistaking her admission there that the UK has indeed been carrying out intelligence flights for Israel. It was well known already, but the government has refused to admit it repeatedly. Yet now it comes from the mouth of a literal defence minister, and one whose portfolio also happens to include arms sales. According to Declassified UK, who have been exposing the surveillance flights the UK had been carrying out since October of 2023, the UK's Royal Air Force has now conducted over 500 surveillance flights over Gaza on Israel's behalf. That's up to March of this year. These missions, which originated from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, a UK RAF base, were never publicised by the UK government until Maria Eagle let slip confirmation during her remarks there. So that admission has now tied Britain more firmly than ever to Israel's military campaign, erasing any sense of plausible deniability now, in my view, that Starmer's regime might have still been clinging to. Action on Armed Violence, the AOAV, in collaboration with Declassified UK, have been tracking these flights, which are publicly available. It's all publicly available information. Every single one of these flights are. Their research shows a pattern of military collaboration that directly implicates the UK in Israel's war crimes, making Maria Eagle's comments not just a diplomatic gaffe, but actually a confession. It is grotesque enough that such an event as this even occurred at the British Museum. What makes it worse is the secretive nature of its organisation, though. The British Museum, which made no public announcement of the celebration, took steps to hide the event from the public, and you can understand why they would do that. They knew the optics. Hosting a party for a state accused of genocide amid ongoing slaughter in a publicly funded cultural institution, of course it was going to provoke righteous fury. And it did. Despite their efforts to suppress the truth, to hide the event, word of course got out, and protesters arrived. Spearheading the demonstration was Energy Embargo for Palestine, the EEFP, who are a direct action group demanding an end to fossil fuel exports to Israel. They have particular beef with BP for enabling the transfer of oil from Azerbaijan to Israel. EEFP's mission is quite clear, and that is that it cuts off the lifelines of industry and finance that enable Israeli apartheid. Their protests were supported by Palestine Youth Movement, Workers for a Free Palestine, Sisters Uncut, Queers for Palestine, Artists and Culture Workers London, and more. Big turnout, powerful coalition of grassroots organisations there that brought the street outside the British Museum during that event to life, with chants and banners and a very large presence of anti-genocide protest. But the protesters were met with an overbearing police presence too, because of course they were. It's the UK now, isn't it? It's a protest. It's a familiar scene to us all now in Britain, isn't it? Where protests rightfully are increasingly, or protest rights, I should say, are increasingly curtailed in the name of public order. Officers corralled activists, blocked access, ensured that the museum's elite guests remained unbothered by public dissent, though they did have to enter around the back, apparently. Oh, bless, shame. Reports also suggest that the counter-protest that was organised by Stop the Hate and Our Fight UK on the side of the Zionists had been done in collaboration with the Met Police and the Israeli Embassy to ensure there was a large police presence, and therefore the police were only going to be taking action against one side, one group of protesters, weren't they? So they may have actually inadvertently drawn even more attention to the event, as much as it might have been attempted to be hushed up. So why is the British Museum prepared to hold such an appalling event then? Well, the British Museum has got its own history of complicity here. In December of 2023, the museum penned a £50 million deal, or signed a £50 million deal with BP as part of a decade-long master plan of mutual cooperation and support. BP, in turn, is deeply entangled in Israeli colonialism, as I alluded to a moment ago. BP is supplying oil to Israel through routes from Azerbaijan. Here's an excerpt from Middle East Eye on that. The BP-operated Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan BTC pipeline has emerged as a major supplier of oil supplies for Israel's military, with crude exports spiking since Israel launched its war on Gaza in October 2023. The pipeline stretches 1,770 kilometres and carries oil from Azerbaijan to Georgia and Turkey. From the Ceyhan terminal in southern Turkey, the oil is distributed to international markets, including Israel. Since Israel launched its war on the enclave, Azerbaijan has seen crude oil exports to Israel increase to around 1.3 million tonnes per month, a sharp increase from the 1.2 million tonnes it exported throughout all of 2022. I've often mentioned Turkish hypocrisy when it comes to their criticism of Israel, Erdogan's hypocrisy, because they could stop that oil at Ceyhan from ever getting anywhere near Israel if they really wanted to do something about it. Turkey aside, though, BP is enabling the Zionist regime's energy security amidst its brutal siege on Gaza, and the British Museum have effectively supported them in this. In fact, in December of last year, Palestinian human rights groups launched a legal action against BP for aiding genocide through the facilitation of these oil transfers. That's a case that's still ongoing. EEFP know this history well as well. In February of 2024, they occupied the British Museum in a landmark protest over it. They were demanding that BP be dropped as a sponsor of the museum, and that all cultural ties with Israel be severed. Their action shone a spotlight on how museums are increasingly now platforms for whitewashing neo-colonial crimes. Too many of the artefacts they may be displaying, and that's especially relevant in this country, have been gained in much the same way. In that sense, the event being held at the British Museum frankly ought to be less surprising. It was more than a party. It was a ritual of imperial affirmation, a moment for Britain's political and corporate elite to declare their allegiance to the Zionist project, to reaffirm their support for Israeli supremacy, and to suppress the truth of Palestinian suffering, ongoing as that is. The Nakba never ended, it simply evolved. The original expulsion of Palestinians in 1948 was not a historical aberration, but the foundational act of a settler colonial state. Today, in the rubble of Gaza, that colonialism just continues, armed and abetted by allies still today, just as it was then, like the UK. Nowhere was this complicity clearer than in the remarks made by Zippy Hotovelli, who praised the UK for standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel in the face of what she claimed were Iran-linked terror plots. Public expression of gratitude for the UK's military assistance as that was. A pat on the back by the Zionist entity for its intelligence sharing and political cover. And it must be noted that her comment came just days before the UK is due to meet with Iranian officials to discuss nuclear diplomacy, making the UK's role as an apparent honest broker in such talks frankly even more farcical at this point than they already were. Hotovelli's framing deliberately conflates Palestinian resistance with Iranian terrorism, casting Israel as a perpetual victim, the permanent victimhood, and the UK as its protector. And of course it is all part of that broader strategy of dehumanising Palestinian people, legitimising collective punishment of them, and ensuring that any act of resistance is framed as terrorism, regardless of any context or of international law. And what of the UK government and Keir Starmer then? Well, Maria Eagle's presence and remarks were par for the course in representing them. They reflect Keir Starmer's wholesale capitulation to Zionist lobbying and his party's sharp, ever rightward drift. Under Starmer, Labour has purged pro-Palestinian voices, has overseen anti-Zionism being punished as anti-Semitism, and consistently voted to support arms exports to Israel, even amid overwhelming evidence of war crimes, and now they're in court over that too. By legitimising Israel's genocidal actions, by aiding its war effort through surveillance, and by celebrating its founding in an institution arguably built on stolen artefacts, at least in part, and certainly doing dodgy deals with immoral oil companies, the UK is an enabler of it all. That the establishment tried to play this event down shows they know how damaging such an event is, yet they still take part in it. It reveals a UK government not merely indifferent to Palestinian suffering, but actively complicit in it, a cultural institution corrupted by fossil fuel money and pro-Israel lobbying, and a political class determined to maintain colonial hierarchies under a different flag. Not everyone is having it, though. From energy embargo for Palestine to workers for a free Palestine, despite the threat of police intervention and persecution, protest just keeps on growing. They understand what is at stake, not just for Palestine, but for all of us. Because the systems that enable genocide abroad, from corporate greed, state surveillance, militarised policing, the same systems that impoverish, surveil and suppress people here at home, increasingly too. Politicians and other guests at this event deserve to be named and shamed, and we the public must take a stand not only in solidarity with Palestine, but against the global structures of oppression that this celebration so shamelessly upheld. The 77th anniversary of the Nakba is not a day to celebrate, it is a day to mourn and to remember, but also to resist. Not everything has gone Israel's way of late, though. Right now, Benjamin Netanyahu might be keen on invading Gaza completely and taking it all over, annexing the lot, but with a new study having shown 1 in 8 IDF soldiers now suffering from PTSD to such a degree as to be unfit for duty, the recruitment problems Israel has faced are now becoming insurmountable. Get all the details of that story to cheer you up a little bit in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.